You know, sometimes adventure takes a little bit more effort to find. Nova Scotia is surrounded by thousands of islands, and there's one in particular that many people talk about, but few ever visit: Big Tancook Island. Now a short passenger ferry ride away from Chester, you'll find Big Tancook and its sister, Little Tancook. And Big Tancook is my destination for today's walkabout. The ferry only runs a few times a day to and from the islands, stopping as needed on the scheduled runs. The ferry does take vehicles occasionally as freight, but that's really limited to getting vehicles onto the island for residents who live there, or government vehicles. Big Tancook Island, where I'm headed, is almost 10 kilometers from Chester. They are close and yet remote. This ferry began operations in 1982, but before then, there have been many ships sailing to the islands as a ferry service. However, before 1935, ferry service was weekly by a boat serving various communities between Halifax and Mahone Bay. Most travel, as a result, was by private boat, something which only happened seasonally since private boats were pulled out of the water for winter. The current ferry is named the William G. Ernst, after the Member of Parliament who, back in the 1930s, worked with a Captain Willis Crooks to outfit a sword fishing schooner to operate as a ferry in the winter months. That's Little Tancook Island coming up behind me, and very shortly I'll be coming to Big Tancook. Now, repurposing a sword fishing schooner for the purpose of a ferry came about because of a particularly difficult winter here in 1935. The winter was so bad, they were unable to get doctors to the island or people to the mainland for medical treatment, and unfortunately 2 people died. So the Gerald L.C. Crooks, which was a fishing schooner owned by Captain William Crooks, was outfitted for the purpose of operating as a ferry in the winter months. So a ferry from December to March, and returning to fishing for swordfish in the summer months when private vessels were still available to transport people. The Gerald L.C. serviced Tancook from December to March, from 1935 to 1941, with a crew of 3. It was an important route. In January of 1936 alone, the ferry carried 324 passengers and 12.3 tons of freight. They completed 28 trips that month, including 2 for medical emergencies. There have been a number of ships over the years carrying people to the islands. A new ferry starts operations in 2023. That will leave from Blandford instead of Chester. And that ferry will take 18 vehicles. Well, this is Big Tancook Island, and it's the largest of all 365 islands in Mahone Bay. But even at that, it's under 5 kilometers in length, and at its widest, it's only 2.5 kilometers wide. There are a couple of restaurants, there's a gift shop or 2, and you can even rent a bike if you don't want to hike. Big Tancook has a population of about 200 people in summer and 150 in winter. Hiking here is really just a matter of following the dirt roads, ATV paths, and walking paths along the shore. Your route options are pretty much endless. On my hike today, I'm heading down Reef Road towards the eastern shore of the island, and then follow the shoreline before heading back to catch the ferry to the mainland later today. This island was once a summer fishing ground for the Mi'kmaq. In fact, the name Tancook comes from the Mi'kmaq word Tancook, which means facing the open sea. When I get to the end of this trail and reach the eastern shore, you'll see exactly how that name came to be. Of course, like most land which was first used by indigenous people, it was seen by European settlers as vacant, unused, and unowned. The Mi'kmaq would only have used Tancook seasonally, retreating to the mainland outside of fishing season. In 1759, the entire island was granted to Patrick Sutherland. He didn't do much with it, as he likely saw it as a nuisance rather than something of value. So in 1790, the Crown took the land back. In 1792, the Crown tried again, and this time awarded Big Tancook, together with Little Tancook and Star Island, which is on the mainland side of Big Tancook, to J.H. Flagler and George Grant. Despite that second attempt, it actually took until 1829 before the British Crown finally brought over 30 German immigrants and French Huguenots to settle here. Many of the people who live here today can in fact trace their ancestors directly to that group of people. Boat building became very big here because, after all, if you live on an island, you're going to need some boats. The first boat was launched here sometime around 1827 by John Baker, and it was named the Three Brothers. 50 years later, Tancook would become famous for the construction of Tancook whalers and schooners, just like that first ferry used in the 1930s. Well, just ahead of me here is a spot called Long Reef. Now, one of the really popular things for hikers to do when they come to Big Tancook is to hunt the beaches for sea glass and seashells. You know, these waves and their pounding bring new finds ashore at every tide cycle. Of course, while sea glass is often thought of as a reverse gemstone, it is the perfect example of one man's trash being another's treasure. After all, sea glass is real glass, which has tumbled over and over in the ocean to become smooth. Much of it from the days before landfills, when glass bottles were common and simply dumped in the ocean rather than heading off for recycling. It's this view that gave Tancook its name, facing the open sea. Behind me, well, that's East Ironbound Island, and people live on that island too. And over there, that's Flat Island. Beyond that, the wide open Atlantic Ocean. Well, after the break, I'm going to be continuing my journey on Tancook Island, around the beach, and through its very rich history. I'm on Big Tancook Island exploring this destination, a place that often goes forgotten. For almost 200 years, the people here have lived a very determined life. I'm on the eastern edge of the island, following the shore through this bit of forest, on my way back to the dirt roads, which make up much of this hike. In the tide pools, you'll find the usual collection of Atlantic characters: crabs, eels, and starfish. Though not a big island, ashore there are a number of animals found here. Deer, muskrat, snakes, and many bird species are the most commonly seen here. In fact, there are 77 different species of resident, seasonal, and migratory birds found on the island. Of course, there are the common ones like pheasants, crossbills, blue jays, chickadees, and nuthatches. But you can also come upon indigo bunting and northern parula, among other birds. You know, the thing about island weather is it is unpredictable, and the rain has moved in despite the fact that you can sort of see the sun peeking through the cloud. Well, when you read things people write about Big Tancook Island, especially when they're not from Nova Scotia, there's one theme in mind. They describe this place just like Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket, the 150-year-old version, before it became a playground for the rich and famous. And to be honest, when people write about it today, not much has changed. According to a news article that appeared in 1906, a visitor from New York described the island as quiet, surprisingly so to him. He wrote, quote, "The island is divided into about 100 farms of almost equal size, each family owning a plot large enough to pasture a cow or two. There are no horses, the farm work being performed by oxen. Fishing is the main industry. There are no rich men, nor is there any hopeless poverty or dependent poor. Luxury does not rear her head, or groping hunger find her home. Those who dwell on Tancook are a delicious disappointment to one saturated with the traditional description of drinking, swearing, and sinful fishermen. There is perhaps no village in America where there is less rowdyism. No liquor can be bought in this home of seamen. There is not a single place of amusement on the island, perhaps not a pack of cards. Outside of a humble school, the church is the sole cooperative institution. In so many ways, this is an idyllic spot, especially, I suppose, to those who live here. Now, despite its small population, it does have a humble school here, Big Tancook Elementary School. It's actually one of the last remaining one-room schoolhouses in all of Canada. It serves both Big and Little Tancook Islands. In 2021-22, it had 11 elementary students, 5 pre-primary students, and 4 teaching staff. The first school opened here on November the 1st, 1820, in the private home of schoolmaster Thomas Gibson. It took 44 years until 1864 for a proper schoolhouse to be built on the north side of the island, directly across from the current building. In those days, the school went from grades primary to 11. There was even a second school located on the south side of the island for grades primary to 5. By 1935, 85 students were registered in either the Northwest or Southeast Cove schools. Northwest Cove School was torn down in 1950 and replaced by the current building. Then, in 1967, students from grades 7 and up were sent to the mainland, and the Southeast Cove School closed. You might expect that on such a small island that everybody would know everybody else. But a woman who attended Southeast Cove Elementary School remarked in an interview a number of years ago that she had not met any of the students from Northwest Elementary School until she reached grade 7. You might expect that on an island so close to productive fishing grounds that the main industry here would be fishing. But for most of the island's history, in fact, it's been farming. A particular type of cabbage brought here and farmed here for 175 years has been used to make sauerkraut, brought here by those German colonists. By the 1970s, farming for cabbage to make sauerkraut was the single biggest industry on Big Tancook Island. The cabbage grown here was small and tight, making it perfect for sauerkraut. The seeds were saved and the fields fertilized over the winter with seaweed. The cabbage itself was hand shredded and put in barrels where it was left to ferment for weeks. Sauerkraut was an important staple in the meals of residents on this island, but it also quickly became popular as an export product. In the early days, it was sold to seafarers and loggers who appreciated the fact that it could be stored for lengthy periods of time without refrigeration. By the 1950s, international news was printing stories about legendary sauerkraut makers such as Calvin Hutt, who would plant thousands of head of cabbage and bring them to Ross Farm on the mainland to produce sauerkraut. Sadly, one of the best-known sauerkraut brands, the one with that iconic red and white box that simply said Tancook brand sauerkraut, succumbed to the financial pressures of the COVID-19 pandemic and shuttered in January 2022 after 75 years. Although the product was made in Lunenburg and not on this island, it was a reminder to shoppers of the determined people who live here. Now, those determined people also rely on that ferry I talked about that only comes a few times a day. and my ferry back to the mainland will be arriving soon. And if I miss that, I'll have no choice but to camp here for the night. I wonder how that new ferry, the one that will take 18 cars, will change life here. It will be the biggest change this island has seen in a long time. Well, after I get back, I'll be trading this island in the Atlantic for a journey inland in search of a castle. Moving inland from the islands of Mahone Bay, the rain has lifted, and I'm here at the trailhead for Castle Rock. Well, in fact, this is not the trailhead for Castle Rock. This is actually the trailhead for the Chester connection. But there's no way to reach Castle Rock unless you start here. And it's here that I'm beginning my walkabout today. This is a popular route for all sorts of uses. The other direction on this trail will take you across the Aspatagan Peninsula to Hubbard's. As a cyclist, if you stay on the road, you can always take the long way around and enjoy the Aspatagan Loop through Bayswater, Birchie Head, and Fox Point on to Hubbard's. This art installation along the Chester Connection Trail by Bill and Donald Gimby is called Leave No Footprints, which is a good message when hiking. The granite bench will weather over time, of course creating no garbage, and these posts are meant to explore. Behind me are some large boulders, which are intended to signify the importance of Castle Rock, which is where I'm headed. This is the East River, and this is where this part of Nova Scotia gets its name. The river itself flows from the north, from Little and Big Whitford Lake. The trail I'm on is an old rail line turned over to the community for stewardship. When I reach the Castle Rock Trail itself, that entire trail and Castle Rock is on land owned by the municipality of the District of Chester. The land was acquired by the municipality in 2018. Above me is Highway 103, which runs from Halifax to Yarmouth. You will sometimes see online an indication that you can travel to Castle Rock by following Boulder Drive, which starts at an interchange near here. However, that road is often locked and is only passable for ATVs. You could certainly hike that road, but it's better to take the trail. Well, this is Labrador Lake, and Labrador Lake means I'm very close now to the Castle Rock Trailhead. So as I mentioned earlier, there's no practical way to get to the Castle Rock Trailhead unless you take another trail to get here, the most common being the Chester Connection. Now, people will travel that 3 kilometers or so in many different ways. You know, they'll bike here, they'll take a stroller, might even pull a wagon. From here, it's a little over 1 kilometer to the look-off of Castle Rock, and unless you're an ambitious mountain biker, you're probably not riding your bike to the top. So the municipality has thoughtfully put a bike rack here where you can lock up that stroller, wagon, or bike and continue on your way. This trail is heavily promoted by the municipality, and they've worked to make it possible for almost any traveler. Their marketing calls it Chester's newest gem. There are 3 marked routes to get to Castle Rock, and each gives you an idea of what type of travel is possible. The yellow route is only passable by hiking and is considered the most difficult route. Running about 1.2 kilometers, the path is narrow and steep, but provides a great view of the cliff. The red route is the easiest and passable by hikers, bikers, ATVs, and snowshoers. That runs for about 1.5 kilometers and is a gentle slope to the top. Midway up the red route, you can duck off onto the blue route, which is a slight shortcut to the summit. It's considered a moderate route and heads up a more woodsy path than the full red route. I'm taking the yellow route. When I hear the name Castle Rock, I can't help but think of Stephen King. Growing up, I've read a lot of Stephen King books. Castle Rock is not only the name of the television show that is based on many Stephen King characters and places, it's also the name of an entertainment company formed in 1987 by Rob Reiner as an homage to the fictional town in Maine where many Stephen King books actually take place. Besides Stephen King, it's actually also the name of the villain's hideaway in The Lord of the Flies. Despite that fun connection, Castle Rock actually has a specific meaning. Rather than a place name, it's actually the name of a geologic feature here. Castles, or tors, are large freestanding rock outcrops that rise abruptly in an area generally characterized by smooth and gentle slopes. So if you think about it, the name Castle Rock is a little redundant. It would literally translate to rocky outcrop rock. That's a bit silly. But that is the common name for this hike and the peak where I'm hiking to. It is also the name that the municipality has given to this area and this hike. The real name, if you look at maps, is Labrador Castle. Labrador, the same as the lake that I passed just before the trailhead. The name Labrador for both the lake and rock appears to originate from the Mi'kmaq. It is a common surname in Mi'kmaq communities, largely understood to mean literally, my ancestors are from Labrador. This sort of surname would have been adopted after European arrival, of course, because the name Labrador itself seems to have originated with an explorer by the name of Joas Fernandez on the Corte Real expedition of the 1500s, who is known as El Lavrador. Records suggest his surname originates with a French word, well known in Nova Scotia, Labrador, as in the lakes in Cape Breton, which translates to arm of gold. Well, there's not much of a view here at the top of Castle Rock today. Unfortunately, since I began my hike, the fog and the clouds have moved in to surround this peak, but it is still a dramatic sight with the fog moving over the trees. On a clear day, I'd be able to see Labrador Lake in the distance. I'd be looking off into the Panuke Wilderness area, and of course in that direction, I would see Mahone Bay and the Aspatagan Peninsula. Fortunately, I saw those in crystal clear sunshine at the start of this hike. You know, the municipality of Chester has a plan to extend this hike into the Panuke Wilderness area. It would be a lovely idea. Makes me think of something that jurist Oliver Wendell Holmes once said when he remarked that a mind stretched by an experience never returns to its original dimensions. I hope on your next walkabout, you get a chance to stretch your mind.
Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Hey, come on, feel the sunshine. Oh, come on, won't you be mine? Sunshine. Hey, come on, feel the sunshine.